From the state to the federal level, and from the private sector to the public sector, David Winston worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the heart of the American healthcare system was beating strong. Before coming to Washington, D.C. in 1977, he served his home state of California as a health policy advisor to the legislature, as Chief Deputy Director of the California Department of Health, and on the faculty of the University of Southern California School of Medicine. As Minority Staff Director of the Senate Subcommittee on Health and for the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee, he brought an intimate knowledge of every level of healthcare policy.
He was behind what I think one could call a healthcare revolution in the 1980s.
David really helped to usher in. He was in part the architect, but then he was the implementer of a lot of major changes in health policy that are still impacting healthcare today.
He really had a deep love for this country and was extraordinarily knowledgeable about its history.
David was really a student of politics and was so well read and versed.
He would just pull together all of this information and he was always open to more information.
David prided himself and made sure that everyone knew that he considered himself just a farm boy from California.
He never forgot the salt of the earth, the farmers in the Central Valley with whom he had grown up, to the people in D.C. where there were, the halls of power. He could pull the two together.
I would describe him as highly skilled. He knew more than almost anyone I can think of about healthcare policy.
He loved to preside over groups, so he would convene his staff at least once a week. He'd take us all out to lunch. And we all looked forward to it because we knew we were going to get his undivided attention and we were going to learn some things.
David was a networker before we had Facebook or MySpace or Twitter.
He had many friends and had a tremendous outreach in the public policy area throughout California, and then when he came to Washington.
I would also describe him as bipartisan, which was a surprise to us given the image of the Reagan camp at the time, which most people thought was fairly right-wing. David was open to working with both sides.
He was not someone who was hard-edged ideologically about how to deal with healthcare issues. He was kind of more someone who tried to do, whatever anyone could think up that might work.
And so that knowledge and that value of partnership and trying to create public policy with partnerships is really what became the foundation for the Winston Fellowship.
And one of his great skills was if you had a problem, he would know 5 people that could help you out and that who would take his phone call, which in Washington is quite a compliment.
And I've had more people come and say, I owe my job to David Winston.
And he had a good sense of humor. He didn't take himself seriously. He was serious about his work, but he really didn't. He didn't have a big ego. He didn't have a big chip on his shoulder. And yet he was somebody that wielded a great deal of influence.
And talking about how you can share your life and share that joy of just being alive, and then being able to, again, infuse your work life with that kind of joy as well, and that kind of sharing that he did.
This wasn't just any person. This was somebody who was very significant in a personal and professional way to all of us, and he left behind principles and a legacy about the workings of professionals on Capitol Hill and in the healthcare field, about private sector versus public sector and competition versus regulation, and a wisdom about how we all should approach these questions that is very important.
The David A. Winston Health Policy Fellowship extends to future generations the ethics, attitudes, and dedications to America that its namesake brought to healthcare policy. 2 years after his untimely death in September 1986, the fellowship was founded, and for 20 years it has been bringing the country's best and brightest young people to Washington, D.C. to experience the same world of policy where David Winston made such an indelible mark.
David had a special appreciation for younger people entering the healthcare policy field and the contributions that they could offer.
That's the energy that David Winston brought. That's the seriousness that David Winston brought. So to me, bringing these young people here honors the contribution that he made And that's a really important endeavor for all of us to be involved in.